Hey.
Hey, how you doing?
Oh, not too bad.
You're good. All right. So that being the case, yawning and all tonight, what's been going on with you?
Well, um, I've been, the drive back and forth um, is about an hour there and back in the morning and about an hour there and back in the evening. And sometimes on the way back, or sometimes on the way there in the morning, and sometimes on the way back, she just wants to put on her headphones and listen to music. So I've got an hour both way, an hour in the morning, an hour in the in
Yeah.
the afternoon. And I had been listening to some of Pernilla's stuff, but
Nice.
things just kind of evolved naturally from the listening to stuff about the second Fetter and the third Fetter, really, too, because as soon
Hmm.
as the second Fetter stuff was finished, I went to the third Fetter. Something, couldn't tell you what now, I don't remember, something that came up in some of her material pointed me back to some of our one-on-ones. And
Nice.
so I listened to one of them, and then that just kind of turned into listening to more of them. And so I've been listening to those. And one of the things that resulted from that was there are two things. Um, Maybe the other one will come to me. At the moment, it escapes me. But the
Okay.
other one was, uh, doing more investigation with regards to what we call second Fetter
Hmm.
issues. And it's interesting how these things work because with starting with Pernilla, going back to her stuff, um, you're looking at second Fetter and starting to try to dig in, and in approaching the sense was, I don't know what's there, and I mean it's not something that's obvious. It has to take some investigation, and then just kind of the sense of, it may be a long time before we find anything. You
Mm.
know, we may not be able to uncover anything at all. It may remain unknown for a long period of time. But
Mhm.
just like the last time I did this about a year ago, in pretty short order, um, things kind of started popping up.
Interesting.
Um, yeah, and I didn't expect it to be so immediate. You know, it's not exactly the right word, but you get
Yeah.
the idea. Um, and so uh, it came up this, actually two other kind of, uh, I forget the term that's used for them. I know she says toxic starting point, but there's another one, something like core belief or something like
Mhm.
that. And we know the big one, the one about you're the problem.
Yeah.
Then what came up was, uh, um, you're a failure, you're a loser, which actually seems to source, from my younger sister. So much of
Okay.
this has been around my mom, but as far as I can tell, because one of the memories about when I heard that really, um, remembering, really being hurt by her words, it was my younger sister. My mom very well could be in the mix on that too, and I know my older sister kind of is a bit, but it seems like a lot of it's around her, which was kind of surprising. I didn't expect that. Um, so that was uncovered, and it, as when that when almost as soon as that was uncovered, it started it started showing up. Like Susanna or Tuesday would say something or do something, and that's the reaction,
Yeah.
that reactions based on that belief, idea of self would come up. And it was
Yeah.
interesting because I'm sure it was coming up in the past, but it wasn't clear. I didn't realize that's what was being, activated or provoked.
Yeah. Yeah.
But here in recent weeks, that has been the case. It's been really clear. It comes up, and I can feel it very clearly. So it's
Mm.
kind of curious how, you uncover something, and then when you uncover something, at least this is my experience, I don't know if this is like this for everyone, that that's the thing that when something provokes you or activates those beliefs, that it's felt that keenly, and that's kind of the emotional lens that those events are felt and experienced through.
Yeah.
So that's been coming up, and then
Mhm.
what was the other one? There was oh, that's right. And then and this isn't really anything new. I knew this already, but one of our conversations from a few months ago, we touched on it, and I realized that um, this is also sort of one of those central pieces that um, comes into play with so much of um, my reactions and my I don't like the word dysfunctional, but these, let's say, less than optimal reactions to um, uh, external stimuli,
Yeah.
is this sense of the world being inherently unsafe
Hmm.
and feeling basically more or less feeling threatened by the outside world. And so now there are three,
Sorry.
sorry, there are three um, of these beliefs. Two of them are about self. One is more my relation to the world, um, and I don't know what else might be there, but it's
Sorry.
kind of at the point where it feels like anything else that would come up. And I say this with the distinct possibility that this could be mistaken. I may be proven wrong, but it seems like, especially those first two, the you're the problem and loser failure. I don't know about the one about the world being such a scary and threatening place, but certainly with the other two, it feels like that's sort of those are the central issues, and anything else that might come up is more an outgrowth of those things, or somehow
Yeah.
secondary or follows on from those things. That
Yeah.
those are the big ones, and perhaps everything else would not have any power or as much power if it weren't for those two things.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
That absolutely tracks.
okay.
Um, and that is and there's such core beliefs. But I'm curious, so you've had some insight now that these things are lurking underneath there and that they're kind of filtering and creating all of your other experiences.
Right.
Uh, the question is, have you done anything with challenging them yet?
Um, that depends on what you mean by challenging them. I
Yeah,
mean, it hasn't been a case of confronting, but two things that happen when they come up. One is something you said in one of our earlier conversations, is that recognizing when these things come up, that something is basically just set off a program.
absolutely.
And so I recognize, oh, okay, so this program is fired up.
Nice.
There's external stimuli and this program's fired up. And then of course the kind of the fallback or default response is, when these things come up, is to just lean into those affirmations.
Yep. And the other question is too, though, like, or the other, I guess, way to work with this is, have you begun investigating what they're actually even talking about? Like, if you have the idea that I'm a loser,
Mhm.
have you defined loser?
No, I haven't. That never occurred to me.
So the more specific you can get about these things, the more you can start to undermine their whole belief system, because you can start to see, like right now, like, what would you define as a loser if there's this feeling that I am one? What exactly is it about the way that you are, about whatever it is, about how, like, it might make it easier if, instead of going directly into me, just in general, what for you denotes a loser?
Well, that's kind of a funny question because personally for myself, I don't believe in such a thing.
Hmm.
I mean, you can take somebody who is um, fallen as far as a person can fall, um, um, and like maybe a street person, but somebody who got wrapped up in hard drugs and they're living on the streets. I don't think of them as a loser. I just that's where their life led them.
Yeah.
I mean, it's
Yeah.
not something, if they could have seen, where their life was going to go, I seriously doubt any of them would have chosen that
Yeah.
path. I mean, as
Completely.
close as I get to that, and I don't know if I would use that term or feel comfortable using it. As close as I get to that are these people who, and they're usually very well-known public figures, people who their whole life is around the pursuit of money and notoriety,
Yeah.
and they're constantly trying to accumulate more stuff.
Yeah.
um, I mean, that seems to me, I mean, how much more dead end can it be?
Yeah.
But I don't know that I've ever thought of any of those people as losers. I mean, I I just don't know of anyone that I would apply that word to.
Yeah.
Yeah, here's the irony.
Hmm.
I was thinking about it over the last, I guess it's been the last week or two, when that feeling will come up.
Yep.
And it's really easy without actually thinking it in that word. It's easy to see myself as such, to see
Yeah.
myself in that way because of certain things about my life.
Yeah.
Funny, I want to apply it to someone else, but it's
Uh-huh.
really easy to think. And again, I don't know that I ever actually used the word, but I might think something like, well, that's me.
Yeah. And so what is it when you have like certain aspects of your life that you're painting in that way, that you're letting these things have a certain connotation that you're attributing to somebody who, like you said, you wouldn't call somebody else a loser,
Mhm.
but but it's fitting that mold. There's something about when you say like that's me, there's something there that you're seeing about yourself that is going into that mold of loser. So what is it that comes up that gives you any of that inkling?
Um, and I'll say this with with this idea up front, is that I think that it could apply to me in a lot of different contexts,
Hmm.
because apparently my younger sister said things about me that created that idea.
Hmm.
And so, my life could have turned out very differently, and I could
Yeah.
still be thinking of myself in that way. But in my life as it is today, um, the thing that fits that mold is the fact that I am the one who takes care of everything in the house. Susanna is the one who earns the money, and I do everything else, which is not an exaggeration. That truly is the way it is.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, if I wanted to go, like if I wanted to go to the Amplify conference,
Yeah.
it would be really hard for me to go,
Yeah.
because for them to be without me for a few days, there'd be a lot of things they're wondering. How do I do this? How does he do this? When do we,
Yeah.
just a lot of practical things that they don't have to think about. Um, so, but anyway, being in that role in our family, um, uh, seems to um, uh, vindicate that message that I got.
I'm curious of why, because to me, from the outside, it's a very commendable role to have so many things on your shoulders, to be taken care of, family, household, all of that stuff. From my perspective, that's the way that I see it. The
Mhm.
word loser or the idea of less than or any of that doesn't equate to that. So I'm curious then, what is it in your programming that makes it so that that to you is in that sort of lesser loser category as opposed to what? Would it be better if you were out working and Susanna was home doing all of what you're doing?
Um, no, it wouldn't necessarily be better, but you kind of touched on it. The business of having a job and earning an income,
Hmm.
that seems to be the qualifier.
So can you feel into what it says that you are not earning an income, that you're not out working?
Hmm.
What does that bring up for you? Are there
I don't know that there's anything there beyond just simply an unquestioned belief.
Hmm. And I mean, we don't necessarily need to know where the belief started, but is it something that is this like a cultural thing that it feels like
Mhm.
the man must, bring home the bacon and that whole thing?
It
Or is-
does kind of feel like that. And I think it's reinforced by the fact that I've gotten grief from people, and more often than not, in fact, I can't think of anyone I personally know who has given me any hell over it. But people I don't know, like neighbors and such like that, um, um, have have been pretty nasty about it, either to me or behind my back. And I think that kind of has reinforced it, at least in the at that cultural level.
yeah, yeah. And so how does it feel when you hear that somebody has done that?
Um, hmm, how does that feel? There's kind of a sting to it, and there's kind of this sense of shame, and maybe guilt and embarrassment.
Eh, Do you feel that at all from your perspective? If you consider your position where you are, your life as it is, do you feel any of that same sting, shame, embarrassment as you do when you hear somebody else criticizing it?
So, in other words, when I look at myself in
Yeah.
this role, um, no, no, actually, I don't. When I look at it from where I'm sitting, um, um, there's none of that. Yeah, no, not at all.
Mm. Good. So what we really need to look at is the um having any sort of reinforcement of identity or
Mhm.
um taking on anything from those supposed views of other people. The fact that you are swayed in any way,
Mhm.
feel some sort of triggering internally, that shame, that embarrassment because somebody else has said something.
Right.
We have to look at why it is that there is still this either clinging to um validation from other people or feelings of being hurt, wounded, and ashamed by comments of these other people.
Okay.
We've talked about it a bit in the past where we talked about people watching these videos in other countries who you'll never meet, and also
Right.
people in your own household saying stuff that hurts, and how so much of that always comes down to how much it touches a wound that's already inside, where
Mhm.
it's still reinforcing some internal, perhaps not conscious belief. But
Mhm.
on one hand, it could be that there is some lingering trace in you of wanting to, earn the money, have that feeling of social acceptance that this is the man's role and all of that old stuff. Without ruling out that there might be some kernel in there, it's also still useful to notice that when somebody says something, when your neighbors say or think something about you, it's that idea that it actually means anything, that it actually has any sort of sway on your view of you.
Right.
Why are you giving them that power? Right? If it's not that there's something inside of you that is just reminding you of, then why is there a need to have other people validate for you that what you do is okay?
I'd love to know because I really don't think that, could be wrong, leaving the
Yeah,
possibility open,
yeah,
so that the door is open for further investigation at a later time. But I really don't think that they're even just a sliver of holding that belief
good,
somewhere deep down inside,
good.
which leaves us with the second one.
Yeah.
I'd love to know. I don't understand it myself. I've wondered about this before, and I've never really been able to get to the bottom of it. Why does what other people think, at least in regard to this, why does it carry such weight?
Okay. So you have at least, you know, the ability to sit with whatever comes up, right? So
Hmm.
if somebody says that you make some sort of comment about you, I don't know, however they phrase it, not living up to your worth or not being man enough or whatever the rhetoric is because you're doing what you do. Do you feel like there's any sway by hearing that? Like obviously you feel that feeling of embarrassment, you feel that feeling of shame.
Hmm.
Does that have any sort of bearing on you're wanting to continue doing what you do, or you're wanting for them to see you otherwise, or you're wanting to not know at least what they're thinking? Like, is there any sort of wish for that experience to be different than it is?
Um, it doesn't have any bearing on how I feel about what I do. I'm okay with what I do, although just for our own purposes, just for the purposes of Susanna and myself and Tex,
Yeah.
um, would like to have some income, just for personal reasons, having nothing to do with
Yeah.
anything outside of the three of us. Um, but when it comes to other people, um, yeah, there. I have noticed at times there's this sense of wishing that um, other people could, at the very least, respect um, what I do, because of the fact that it's more often than not, it's not easy. you
Mm.
know it's like having a full-time job and a part-time job on top of it. you know?
Absolutely.
And I don't get weekends off or vacation days.
Absolutely.
So
Yeah.
yeah, there has been that sense of wishing that I could have the respect of other people.
Mm. So is it also that there is a lack of recognition of what you actually do?
Yeah, I think in some cases, I don't know that in all cases, but yeah, in probably a lot of them. Yeah.
Mm. Okay. So it still comes back to the need for validation.
Right.
When you feel those shameful sensations, when you feel that arising of um yeah, that that shameful sting,
Yeah.
is that something that it immediately like brings you back to something in the past? Is it like something like a very familiar kind of feeling?
That's a good question. I've never really thought about it. Thought to look at it from that angle. Um, Yeah, in a couple of ways. One is, of course, just the whole self-worth thing, the whole issue of um, being the problem in the family. And then, of course, um, the idea of being a loser, failure, and that underneath that is um, that my family didn't really see me as having any worth or value.
Mm.
But there's also this familiar sense of once again being on the outside of things, because as a kid I was what is the um I was one of those nerdy geeky kids that was you know for instance in school, you had the popular kids and what have you, and then you had all these oddballs, the outsiders,
Yeah.
I can't think of the right word for it, but I was invariably in that group of people.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was always with that group of people who are on the on the fringes, and that's been my whole life. Then when I hit adulthood, um, and I started earning a living, for most of my adult life, I was doing music, which
Mhm.
is not a quote unquote normal thing. So once again, I'm not in the mainstream of society. I'm in one way or another. I'm kind of, out there on the edges again. Never mind the
Mm.
fact that most musicians are oddballs. um,
True, true,
uh,
true that.
and so then we get to a point where we realize what we really need is for one of us to be home with our daughter so that she's not being raised by daycare and what have you. And I was the most logical choice just based on income. So once again, I'm doing something that's, kind of on the outside of things in terms of cultural roles and
Mm.
expectations and
Yeah.
so forth.
If you hadn't had to, like, all things considered, if you hadn't had to have stayed home to take care of her and all of that, would you have been happier working, still continuing to do what you did, even from that outsider perspective? Or
Well, I always did. Well, I shouldn't say always. As a general rule, I felt good about that. And I usually enjoyed doing that. I mean, there are exceptions because there's sometimes where you have to take, some kind of job um, um, that maybe wasn't ideal because, you know, anytime you have an opportunity to earn money doing that, you do it.
Mhm.
Uh, but would I have been happier doing that? Not necessarily. I mean, it was comfortable and it was familiar, but I think that if I hadn't, at the very least, I would have been troubled by um, Tuesday being in daycare um, on the weekdays and then during the summer.
Mm.
She would have spent a lot of time in daycare, um,
Yeah.
and that I wouldn't have felt very good about that. Um, I think it probably also would have bothered me that um, I wasn't able to, because Susanna wasn't going to be able to, because she has a job where she's working during the day, and
Mm.
sometimes she works a lot of hours, so it wouldn't be possible for her to do things like take our daughter to playgrounds or to a water park, or get her to the doctor and things like that. So I think I would have been bothered by the fact that I I would be aware of the fact that those are things that a kid needs, but I wasn't doing them because I was doing this thing that I wanted to do. So I think I probably would have been bothered sooner or later by a sense of um, um, self self-seeking.
Mhm.
So no, I have a feeling that probably wouldn't have worked out too well.
Yeah. reason I asked too is the way you described it, it sounded like there was a hint of concession there. Like when you say it was like the logical choice for you to stop and stay home, it sounded like there was a little bit of because of who you are and what you've done, and that kind of outside weirdness, that it was just logical that you would be the one, all things considered. And it's just in the phrasing of it really sounded to me like there was
Hmm.
a hint. I might be completely off base, but it's just what kind of came across.
Well, I'm that's something I'll keep open and just kind of make a mental note on to look at that from time to time when things related to it come up. But when I said it in that moment, the reason I said it the way I said it was because, um, I was teaching music, I was playing, doing gigs with any number of different bands. And in spite of the amount of time I put into it and the amount of time I was gone, Susanna still made significantly more than I did, which is fine. I don't care about all of that business about
Yeah.
how much a person earns based on their gender. But it would have been not only foolish, but it would have been a horribly bad judgment um, for me to be the one to stay with the work that they do.
Yeah.
You know, we
And
would
I
have paid a pretty horrible price for that.
and I get that on a very logical, reasonable, practical, financial place, but I just want to make sure that in you there is complete coherence with that, because I do feel like, when there's like that issue of resentment about doing, unloading the dishwasher for the 10,000th time and things
Uh,
like that, I wonder if there is some root still in that is maybe propelling some of these deeper resentments that are in there.
well, a couple of things. One is, we were talking about that stuff about this time last year, and that has by and large disappeared.
Nice.
There's, I mean, it does show up sometimes when there is a ton of stuff going on,
Yeah.
and I'm kind of overwhelmed, and I've got somebody who is 16 going on 17 who's able-bodied
Yeah.
and could help me. Especially
Sure.
here in the last month when Suzanne's been recovering from surgery and can't do anything for herself.
Yeah.
I've got God knows how many balls in the air. It's like you're just hanging out on the couch looking at your phone. Can I please have some help?
Yeah.
And it's sometimes you get it, sometimes you don't. So some of it is about that. But outside of circumstances like that, um, that message was taken to heart. And if I catch myself indulging in that, I bring it to a stop real quick.
Mhm.
Because the way I understand it is, well, you've lost perspective here.
Yeah. Which is
um,
true. And again, I this is like, you know, not so much in how you react to it. It's just making sure that there's no kernel of underlying something that hasn't been seen before. It might not be making big waves at this point, but it's just to make sure that there's nothing under there that we're not addressing. And there
if
might
there's,
not be, but I just want to be clear.
yeah, I don't know. That's something I'm going to have to spend some time. I'm just going to have to kind
Yeah.
of let that um, kind of um, operate in the background for a while and see what comes up. I, huh,
Don't force it if it doesn't feel right. I just,
yeah.
just be aware just in case, and see if if that happens to feel right to you at some point, that there might be some thread tied to that.
Well, there are a couple of things though that I think are worth mentioning, but one is um, there is still some lingering bit of um, I don't know what to call it remaining from. We went through a period of about 2 years where things were really just just bad in the house. They were just really dark.
Mhm.
Um, don't want to go into it too deeply because it's not entirely relevant, but just to kind of paint the
Yeah.
picture, Susanna had something happen that set off all of this. Um, well, the way a psychologist friend of mine put it, she said she's been re-traumatized. She
Mhm.
was re-traumatized with regard to all of the really egregious, hideous things that were done to her as a kid. And that put an incredible strain on things between the two of us.
Mhm.
And that did all kinds of weird things to the dynamic in the house. And I got to a point where I referred to myself as Cinderfella.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
um, so I think sometimes, it, you can fall into the trap of um, feeling taken for granted,
Yeah.
and then it winds up referring back to that time period, which that's not now because fortunately things couldn't be any different. I mean, we're almost in a polar opposite situation from that point in time. So that's one thing is I think maybe there still is some kind of tie back to or a holdover to that time period. Um, and then the other thing is that, um, and I don't know if I've completely let go of this or not. I think I have because I've really tried to, but there still is some kind of little, I mean, I don't even know what the word to use is, but there is something about the fact that I didn't want to be a parent.
Mhm.
It was what Susanna wanted,
Yeah.
and I don't feel angry towards her. I don't have a grudge. I don't feel resentful towards her. Um, but there are times when things will get really difficult, and I might have a thought about that.
Mhm.
Something along the lines of, um, if we hadn't made this decision,
Yeah.
wouldn't be dealing with this because without getting to specifics right now, and I'm not even sure it would be a good idea to get into specifics in a public way.
Mhm.
Um, we've had some things come up in the last month with texts that you have they come up from for most everyone, if not everyone,
Mhm.
but it's not anything that parents want to deal with.
Yeah.
um, so when some of those things come up and you recognize you have a really serious situation you have to deal with, otherwise the consequences could be pretty profound. It's hard not to for the mind to not go there to God, if only we, you know but I say that because I'm trying to be as thorough
Yeah.
as I can and make sure I don't leave anything out. But um, that's just, it's not even wishful thinking. That's just some part of the mind wishing that it could escape an
Exactly.
unpleasant present.
Yeah, exactly. I was gonna say it's more of a fifth fetter thing of that if only this moment wasn't so uncomfortable. If only
Right.
I didn't have to deal with this right now. Oh, if I had taken that path, I never would have had to have dealt with this.
Right.
And all that's doing, it's obviously it's not changing anything, but it is getting you out of the body in that moment. It's putting you in a different
Um,
time period where you're all of a sudden now able to jump out of this into some imaginary other dimensional universe where that never happened. Never had a
right.
kid. Life is just easy. You're out playing gigs and everything is different. And that is only a distraction from what's actually happening right now. Because
Right.
in that moment, it just seems way too uncomfortable. And the call, of course, like always, is to come back to the discomfort, to just be with it here without any extra labels on it. So without the like, obviously, I don't know what the situation is, but whatever the situation is, feel how bad it feels in the body to be in that particular situation, and then notice how much you are adding to it by creating either possible outcomes of this situation. How much is it that you're predicting how bad this could go in the future, as
Right.
opposed to where it actually is right now?
Hmm.
Notice, are these sensations in the body actually related to this situation right now? Are they helping anything? It's like a warning light or a warning bell, but is that warning bell actually alerting you to anything that you need to do now? Like, is it performing a function? Or is this a remnant of other times that you have been in uncomfortable situations before? And then you can acknowledge it, recognize that there is a similarity here, that's something that you have felt. I've been in a stressful situation before, and the body feels like this. And then come back to the raw, uh, the needs of the moment, just what is here right now, without the thought of where it's going to go, or that this sensation has anything to do with what you actually have to do right here.
Hmm.
The purpose of that is, of course, so that you can still deal with the situation, but from a much more level-headed, calm, cool, easy, less distracted, less reactive way.
I see. Hmm. Okay.
It's almost like if you had somebody, and again, don't know the situation, but it's like if you hired somebody who is in no way related to the family or anything else to come in and deal with the situation for you, they're not going to have the baggage that you have with it, right?
Hmm. Yeah.
They're coming in from a very detached, matter of fact, okay, well, we'll do this, we'll do that. And if it works or it doesn't, they're kind of like, not my family, it doesn't matter. And I'm not saying that you should be like totally, whatever happens, but in you, there can be that kind of okay, calm, content, ease, regardless of the situation, so that you can be engaged, you can make decisions, you can do what you feel is right, but without having to feel that, no, this is really dire. I'm super uncomfortable about having to do whatever this is.
And let me go ahead and bring this to your attention in case it
Mhm.
makes, in case it's helpful,
Yeah,
for the sake of this conversation. Like I said, there's one thing that we don't want to discuss this in a
sure.
public forum. Um, but one situation we're dealing with is Tex thinks that when she's 18, that because she's a legal adult, that she at that point in time she is totally free, and neither Susanna or I can say anything about what she does. That we are totally powerless to do anything about anything she should choose to do. And her boyfriend is learning to drive. And without getting into all the particulars, I'll just say that it's been commented by more than one person that this kid has no business driving a car. Part of it is because I don't know if he's ADD, ADHD, what, but that kid, his attention span.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't see how it's possible. And so she's going to hit 18 and she's going to think that she can go and get in the car with him. Some of the more obvious things that come to mind are also a concern. But Susanna and I both are really concerned that she may go off with him one day and we may be going to ID her.
Yeah.
you know, because I just think it's not an if, it's a when before he winds up in an auto accident of some degree.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah. I hear that.
so and I know that that's down the line, that's not now. And when this comes up, I do tend to remind myself, well, that's not now. But at the same time, there's still the body reacting to it, going, oh God.
Well, and what is the function of that? Are you when it comes up, is it urging you to make some decisions for the future about,
Yes,
okay,
yes, absolutely.
so can you then notice, because I like the fact that you're saying like this is not now. So noticing that, um, if you're like making use of it and actually utilizing it to make some sort of plan about the future, which of course, God knows it's still another year and something away, right?
Right.
So any number of possibilities, like infinite number of possibilities could happen between now and then, which will make all of that completely moot.
Fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed, in a good way, because of
Yeah.
course, things can happen also in any way, right? So
Yeah.
anything can happen. Um, but it's still even being able to come at the planning stage with a detached non-reactivity,
Right.
right?
Okay.
So are you picturing problematic situations, like picturing yourself having to deal with this in a year's time, her going off with him? Are you like picturing the situation as it happens and then feeling the gut reactivity to that?
Sometimes, I mean, sometimes I do, and then sometimes it's just without mental images and without any sort of storyline, just a simple awareness of the fact that that's something that's impending.
Mm. So in that moment, breathe, feel into the body.
Mm.
Also notice, is this one more manifestation of that belief that the world is a dangerous place?
Wow, man, you're right. I hadn't thought of it in those terms. I guess so.
So recognize, like, is this true? Is this something that is actual, or is this one more filtering, one more fabrication of that primary starting point?
Uh, I don't see how it couldn't be.
So it's just to recognize it when it's happening. And yes, of course, it is possible that in a year's time you will have to deal with that. Yes, it's great to make plans ahead of time just in case, and if you can figure out something, wonderful. With the humility to know that it's a very good chance that those plans will never either have to come to action, or that they might not work, right? Like you can do it
Mm.
with that same non-attachment to the outcome, but then also recognizing like how much of this actual my experience of what is happening now and of my projections of the future is something that's rooted in reality, and how much of it is based off of that core primary starting point that everything is dangerous. The world is a dangerous place, and I have to do everything I can at every turn to try to protect me and my family, because it is inevitable that something is going to try to take us out. Some calamity is always going to befall us in one way or another.
I think it's almost entirely that starting point, and only just a very small fraction of it is a practical, rational response to um, a situation down the line.
Good. So when you notice that, you can jump to those or affirmations, I mean, not aphorisms, that I am safe. I am, you know, look around you for one thing, notice the actual situation. Are you actually in physical danger? Is she in physical danger? Does that does that fear reaction actually relate to what's here right now? Or is it completely
Hmm.
relating to a fabricated hypothetical happening in the mind?
I see. Okay.
And
Hmm.
then in the moment, remind yourself that I'm safe. I'm okay. She's okay. There's no reason to feel any of that in this moment. You can feel it. It's okay for it to be there. You don't have to distract from it. But just recognize again and again that it's not actually serving a purpose in cases like this.
Hmm.
If it comes to her saying, is it okay to go skydiving without a parachute? And then you get a feeling of like, No, in your chest, in your stomach. Yes, by all means, that's a reasonable one.
Right.
I've done that. But if it's a hypothetical of something that might happen in over a year, that again, like who knows what's going to happen between now and then?
He could spontaneously combust.
Very possibly it happens, right? Like every how many of Spinal Tap's drummers, right? Like, isn't it more like it's a thing?
Yeah. Uh, thank you for pulling that one out.
You're very welcome. So so it's just having that recognition of how much am I reacting to that is actually here in this moment, and how much am I reacting to something which my mind is creating for whatever reason. It might be to distract you from what is actually happening right here because it's more enticing for whatever reason to be lurking in the future than it is to be right now.
That's a good point. I hadn't thought of that. And lately, and it's nothing against Susanna. I mean, it's really not.
Yeah,
She can't help it. She's had surgery, and I don't begrudge her that. But
yeah,
in the last 4 weeks have been just unbelievable,
yeah,
and it's not hard to imagine that the mind would like to find a little escape valve somewhere.
yeah. And even if that escape valve is someplace stressful, it can be
Hmm,
also useful because right now everything is essentially out of your control, right? There's that feeling of in the future, even when you create those hypothetical danger zones, that hypothetical problem, you can now create a hypothetical solution for it because it's not real. It's not actually happening.
I see.
You have control of that situation because it is solely happening in your mind. You don't have control of this one because it's involving actual people in your actual surroundings where you actually have no control.
Right.
So it's comforting, even when we think of those those stressful possibilities, because we can think our way out of them. Gives us that feeling of control back.
Huh. Interesting. I never thought of it like that.
Mm,
Huh. Hmm. I really, I mean, you know, uh, as I told you, things come up, and
yeah,
I use these sorts of responses to things, but I never thought about it in terms of giving the mind some sense of um, control, or really the way I kind of frame it is not being powerless.
mm,
Um, okay.
yeah, yeah. The mind has a lot of wish fulfilling gems in it, and so these are very convenient ways of fabricating what we feel like we need now, but we don't currently have.
Huh. Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
And of course, it's, what it's picking isn't random. It's picking it because it's still coming from your starting points. So
Hmm.
if you had, a starting point that everything always works out for the best, no matter what happens, life just works out because there's a plan for everything, then your imagined situations are probably not going to be ones where things are running off the rails and you have to find some solution for it. There's going to be some
Right.
other one that is coming up, but this just happens to fit your MO.
Well, I kind of knew it based on all the conversations we've had.
Mm,
Um, but I never really thought about it clearly and specifically and precisely about, or in terms of reactions, and those reactions having their basis in these starting points.
yeah. Yeah, it's very hard to get away from these starting points because they are coloring the entire experience. They're literally fabricating the entire experience.
Right. But it seems to me that it's going to be more helpful, possibly beneficial, maybe not, but it seems like it, that when their reactions, and this is essentially what you're saying to do, is to look and see how they relate to these starting points
Mm-hmm.
rather than just simply, okay, I mean, there's nothing wrong with it. It's a good start to say, okay, get back in the body, come
Yep.
back to here, feel
Yep.
what's going on. But it seems like it's going, um, it's going another step further
Yeah.
to get back in the body, feel the sensations. Okay, how does this relate to these starting points?
Exactly.
To see what the um, underlying mechanism is.
Exactly. Yeah, because with the fifth fetter work, like especially the way that like Kevin and Christiane work with it, you're really working with the first half of that. It's feeling like I'm feeling reactive right now. I'm wanting to escape. So then I come back to the body. I sit with the sensations, recognize that there's no reason to react to this, that it's not that bad, that the sensations can be there, that those sensations have no actual connection to reactivity, to wanting something that's not here, to another person saying something about me, and all of that. And it's super useful and it's super helpful and it really does, work on that level. However, those sensations are still coming up, right? You're still in a situation where you imagine something, gripping happens in the body. There is a feeling of discomfort. Now you just don't have to do anything with that discomfort, which is wonderful. But I still think it begs a deeper question of why is that coming up to begin with? And that is
Yeah.
where it brings us to the second fetter again, where you still have these hangups of, well, my core belief is that everything is freaking scary and out to get me. That's why that sensation is coming up to begin with. So that's why we go back to the second fetter and work with that, because the less that sensation is coming up, the less you even have to worry about fifth fetter reactions of reactivity against something else, because you're only reacting to that sensation. You're reacting to that discomfort. If that discomfort has no reason to arise in the first place, you don't have to worry about reactivity anymore. So it's kind
And
of cutting out the roots as opposed to just cutting off the stem.
so when it comes to coming back to the second fetter and working with that and cutting
Mhm.
it off at the roots, what are we doing specifically to do that? I mean, because I know what you've said so far, and you've said before about coming back to the body, feeling the sensations, but obviously there's more to it than that if we're going to cut this off at the root.
Sure, of course. And that's why we have all of those second fetter exercises. So, like, on one hand, it can be useful just bringing these things to light. So, just recognizing that this is actually just a starting point that is coming up can be useful. Those those positive affirmations are part of it. The reparenting is part of it. All of these things are there, whatever happens to resonate with you in that moment. These are the things that are there for going in and going deeper. And even this is where, therapy can help as long as we're not getting stuck in the stories of reinforcing the I who went through all of it and all of that. But there are
Right.
tons of, cognitive behavioral therapy techniques and all sorts of things which work basically on that second fetter kind of level. And that's why, like Kevin and Christiane say, even after you do all 10 fetters, you might still have to go to therapy to deal with the other stuff. We're just working with it kind of earlier on because it makes everything else so much easier if you get rid of those,
Right.
if you at least work through some of those. And then the more you're doing like the fifth fetters and later fetter stuff, the easier it is to access some of these second fetter issues that have still been locked underneath that just haven't had the
Huh.
ability to be seen or the space or so it gets easier and easier to work with them. The less reactivity we have to these sensations when they come up, the less identification we have with the stories that surrounded them, the less belief we have in any of our thoughts. That less buy-in. Yeah, because there's an idea, right? If the idea comes up that the whole world is scary, there has to be some buy-in to that thought, to that belief that's there.
Right.
So the more we just get clearer and clearer on the fact that our beliefs are bullshit. They're really have a foundation of fundamental nonsense. And then two, that our what they're talking about is this non-existent self that it has no inherent substance of its own either. And
Right.
so it's just vacant. It's basically like a fictional story about a character that doesn't exist, written in a book with just blank pages. There is like absolutely nothing there. It's like an imaginary story about somebody, like me telling you that there was a book that I read about this guy who once left his house, and there was this great story involved with it. And I'm not going to tell you what it is. There, like, the the story doesn't exist. It's about somebody who doesn't exist. I mean, it's just vacancy upon vacancy upon vacancy. And that's, the more you get to that, the more any of this stuff that comes up, because they are just old programs, they don't have any inherent believability or any necessity of being taken on as anything real or worthy um of what's the word I'm looking for? Like giving it credence, or taking it seriously.
Right.
So that's why it just gets easier and easier and easier, and you start to be more open to things just appearing. Um, we had a really funny one today that I have no idea what it means, but this is the whole thing, is that you don't get into the meaning of it. It's just the recognition of the experience.
Okay.
We were eating lunch and we had pasta and vegan meatballs. And it was the weirdest thing, because like I took a bite of the meatball with the pasta, and I had this like flash image. It was like a little child, and there was like a feeling with that of being like, this is like oh my God, like this is like all my meal. Like I can, like, choose to eat the meatball and the other thing, and like I can eat as much of it as I want, or like it's like how do I put it? It was the weirdest thing, because it's like I have no frame of reference for even why that feeling came up, but it was like it's okay, like it's like, I can do it however I want. There was like a feeling of slight like autonomy, where like as your kid, it's like every little grain of like autonomy becomes like, oh my God, like I've got the power. And it's like that kind of a thing. And it happened for like a second. And it was just so weirdly out of place, because
Huh.
it had like this just absolute feeling of, for a second, this like superimposed child that was there.
Hmm.
And like, it was just one of those things that I can make stories out of it. I can draw, one or two parallels to recent life, but it's just like, as things are loosening up, as there's, like Pernilla equates it to just healing. Like it's like stuff that hasn't been able to be seen before just gets released, and it's just like, this comes up now, and whoop, and there it goes. And it's just such a strange phenomenon, but there we are.
Well, let me ask you then, because that may explain something that came up earlier this week. I sat down to write out all this stuff about the second Fetter, because I wanted to get it really clear and kind of take stock of it.
Yeah.
And as I was writing it down, um, and I told you about this, but you may or may not recall it. When I was young, I was 4 or 5. My mom buying me like some kind of sort of float at a soda
Yeah.
fountain,
Yeah,
and
completely.
the awareness of I could just drop this and it would shatter, and
Yeah.
why the tremendous feeling of loss around it. And while I was writing this stuff out, all of a sudden it just kind of came up seemingly out of nowhere. I mean, out of nowhere enough that I thought, what does this have to do with anything? And almost kind of a sense of, God, it sounds like just a typical psychological mumbo jumbo. But anyway, the thing that came up into awareness was this sense, and saying it out loud is just going to say, oh, okay, yeah, sure. But at the time, it really seemed, I don't know, it really seemed to it seemed to really have some energy behind it, or it seemed like it
Mhm.
meant something more than just what it sounds like it means. I don't know how to
Yeah.
express the sense that came with it. But anyway, what came up was I just wanted my mom to love me.
Yeah. Yeah.
And And it seems obvious, but at the time it wasn't. That had never occurred to me before in all of these years. That had never crossed my mind.
Yeah.
Like, and there was like, wow, I guess so. And so things like, having her buy that thing for me at the soda fountain was significant. And my guess is it symbolized love and or affection. And that probably felt pretty precarious, and here's this awareness that, and I could just drop this and be gone. And I still don't completely understand it. I don't, I, there's more to it, but at the time I got enough of a sense of that was related, and that was what I wanted and I didn't get. And I just kind of had to stop writing for a minute and think about that.
Yeah.
And I've thought about it on and off since that day, but there's been kind of a sense of, okay, I don't know what to do with that. Like, yeah, it seems obvious, but I don't know what to do with it. And when you described what happened to you earlier
Yeah.
today, that kind of made me, that reminded me of it. That brought that to mind. And um, I'm wondering if that's all it is just something that needed to come up and needed to make its way into awareness.
It is very possible. Yeah, it's a lot of times this stuff, the more our defenses are down, the more we don't have the identification and the barriers and the mechanisms that are holding all of this in place, you can start to just have these sort of spontaneous memories, spontaneous connections, spontaneous emotions. But again, you don't have to do anything with it. Like I had that like excitement, that the weird momentary about this bowl of pasta and vegan meatballs. And of course, I didn't eat it all. Like it was like it's like, the idea of like woo that shows up with this like very childlike image, but it had nothing to do with me in the chair eating this food. Like it was totally irrelevant to that in this moment. It's just something that for whatever reason shows up and then it's gone. And instead of like, really trying to make something out of it and like psychoanalyze it and cling on to it and, go make 100 different potential stories out of it. It's just recognizing like, oh, there it is.
Well, see, and that was the very thing. And I think that's what I was trying to express when I was talking about, just typical psychological mumbo jumbo.
Yeah.
I didn't want to make anything out of it. It
Yeah.
came up. It's like,
Exactly.
yeah, wow, that's really surprising. It seems obvious now that it's shown up in attention. Now that it's made its way to the conscious mind. But I really don't want to do anything with this. I mean, to the
Yeah.
point that I didn't write anything down about it. Um, um, I kind of sat with it for a while and then went on back to what I was doing. And
Yeah.
I haven't wanted to revisit. So it's nice to know that that is possible for some of these things, that you don't have to do anything with it. And I don't know, maybe the reluctance or the resistance to doing anything with it might point to something, but I don't think so. It feels more like, there's been enough heavy stuff in the last year. If this can just kind of come and go on its own and not have to turn it into another something, that would really be nice.
It's so funny because I was going to say that it can be a way of bypassing it and not wanting to feel it or work with it or do anything with it. Which again, we don't need to force anything. If it is something, the time will come. You will have another shot at it for sure.
Okay.
Right? Like it's not like you only get one shot at these things. If it's there and it's causing issues and it's been there for decades, you're probably going to get another pass at it.
Okay. Well, I'll leave it in that category.
Yeah, yeah, but it is also relevant if it does, and if you are inclined to do it, especially when you're looking for somebody else's love and approval and affection and validation and all of that stuff. You always got to bring it back to that the feeling that you didn't get then, you can imagine now, and you can fulfill that now, right? There was an idea that I needed this thing to give me something back when I was a kid.
Um, I don't understand the connection.
Yeah.
This is something that, well, I guess will have to be sorted out and made sense out of, understood over time. But it just kind of hit me that what I just said about my mom wanting her love,
Yeah.
and what we talked about last week with the whole thing with the caffeine,
Yep.
not just the caffeine, but probably the alcohol, and the fact that over the years I've had a pretty serious sweet tooth. All of these things, which would I can't think of too many things that don't fall into the category of it, but most of it, like 90% of it, is stuff that can be consumed.
Hmm.
And but it seems like I'll stick with the caffeine for now, since that's the thing that popped into mind. It
Yeah.
seems like somehow, I don't understand it, there's a connection between the compulsion for caffeine and what I didn't get from my mom.
Hmm. Yeah.
That
Yeah.
that's as much as I say. I don't understand it, but when you're talking, all of a sudden that hit me out of nowhere, and could be wrong, but it felt right intuitively.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. So when you, what do you feel? We also talked a bit about last week with the caffeine that it feels like when you like going to the stopping off to the place to buy yourself a coffee
Mhm.
is like a type of self-love. Maybe not the best balance,
Right.
long run, but that is like a type of self-care where you're like, I have been running my ass off and this is me doing something for Darrell for a minute. I am treating myself to that. It's that moment of self-love that, again, not the healthiest version given the consequences to it, but I think that's where the root part of the root of that lies. And
That's
so,
part of it. Oh, go ahead.
yeah, no, so I'm curious the other manifestations of needing that obviously there's every addiction has that distraction basis where we're always using that thing to distract from feeling what it is that we're actually feeling without it.
Right.
So to see like how much of it is you trying to compensate for that lack of love in ways which maybe are not the healthiest, but that you are attempting to fill that void by loving yourself or giving something to yourself as compensation for that child who didn't get what he felt like he needed.
Mhm.
So can you now, instead of using any sort of substance or any sort of problematic substitute, can you really feel like you are giving that same love and validation to yourself because you know what it feels like. You know what that vacancy felt like, right? As a kid, it was like you knew you were missing something.
Mhm.
So you had to have felt some semblance of love from her or somebody else at some point that you knew that there was something that was missing.
Hmm. Yeah, I'm not sure who that was, but
Yeah.
I think you're right. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
So how would you, no, no, not at all. So how would you have defined, this is a very hard question to answer. And if you don't have an answer for it, it's fine. But like, do you have any inkling of when you were that age, how you would have defined that love? How did you want her to express that love to you?
I would have to think about that for a while.
Yeah, sure.
I'm sure I can answer that question. It's something that will take some time to just kind of sit on it
Sure.
and let the answer come up.
That I think will be interesting. The other shorter version, which you could do now, is even now, if she was here, how would you need her to show you to express that love for you?
Well, let's go back a step. What was the first question?
Yeah, how would your younger self have needed her to express or show her love for you? And then also what would that have felt like to you?
So how would the younger self say it again?
Yeah, how would the younger self have wanted or needed her to express or show that love for you?
I'm writing it down because that's
Yep,
something I'm going to sit with. I'm going to
totally.
take my journal and sit down with it either later tonight or over the weekend. Uh,
Amazing. And then the second part of that was how would little Darrell have felt that? How would that have felt to him if he had actually gotten that love that is expressed in whichever way you needed it? How would it have felt and how would it have been different from what you actually experienced?
okay. I, with some time, I can answer that.
Hmm. But then again, the question now is too, if she was here now, how would you need her to express or show you that love now?
Hmm. That one's going to take some time too.
Hmm.
I, I, I'm not, sometimes how when you go looking for something like that internally, you can kind of get a
Mhm.
sense that,
Yeah.
it's there. I just need to get to it. Well, I'm not even getting that. It seems like that one's, it's not something easily answered in a moment.
Hmm.
Um, I mean, I can't even imagine. I mean, I don't know. I can't imagine. I mean, I can't even pretend to try to even take a guess at what that would look like or what it would feel like because um, there was almost none of it. I mean, I heard my mom. I don't ever have a conscious memory of her ever saying "I love you." She
Mhm.
probably did. I feel like she must have at least a few
Yeah.
times, but I cannot clearly recall it, which is interesting because my dad also never really said that except one time, and I do remember it. I
Mhm.
remember this. I remember the situation very clearly. Um, there was almost no affection shown in the house, almost none. And I'm not complaining. I'm not none of that. I'm just saying simply,
Yeah.
this is how it is. So, um, and I have gotten things of this sort from other people over the years, primarily Susanna, because we've been together for so long. But and aside from some really obvious things, I wouldn't want from my mom any of what Susanna demonstrates. You know, so I don't know.
It's going to be a curious one to investigate, but also it's interesting you said that because my next question was going to be, how is it that you feel, acknowledge, and recognize when other people are demonstrating and expressing love for you?
Well, that one's a little easier. A big one is when someone actually gives me their attention. And
Hmm.
what I mean by that is, and boy, we have a real problem with it in this house because Tuesday and Tex and Susanna are, uh, there's a strong tendency towards what the internet refers to as look a squirrel, if you know what I'm referring
Yeah.
to.
Yep. Yep. Totally.
Um, and so, um, and when they talk to each other, they constantly interrupt each other and they don't think anything of it because they both, have this squirrel tendency.
Yeah.
Whereas when when I'm talking with somebody, I make it a point to do my best to really listen to them and
Yeah.
try not to interrupt and
Yeah.
wait until they're done speaking before I say something. Um, so if Susanna listens to me, really gives me her attention, that's a big deal, which actually I think there is some of that in my relationship with my mom when I was a kid. Um, what else? I think when someone trusts me,
Mm.
I think that's another one too. And not only in the sense that they trust me, like, um, I've got $500 in cash and I need you to hold on to it for me.
Yeah.
Sure that, but also in the sense of, um, um, I can't think of a really good example. But let's say, gosh, I really am not feeling well and I don't know what to do. And okay, so what are your symptoms? What are you feeling?
Yeah.
Okay, well, let's try this. When someone trusts me enough to, heed whatever it is that I'm saying to them, like, try this, do this, this might work, this might help you. Um, and I guess a similar sort of thing is if somebody has a situation and they don't know how to handle it, like Susanna has it all the time with work, and she'll start talking about it. And now she's not always looking for input. Sometimes she just needs to air it out. But there are times where she really feels stumped and she has to do something, and she'll ask me about it. What do you think? And well, if it were me, I would. So those sorts of that trust in that form,
Yeah.
that's I think another way that it shows up with me, where somebody trusts me enough, um, that they will rely on me or take my suggestions, or things of that sort. Um, I'm sure there's more, but I can't think of what they are right now.
Mm. Be an interesting thing to investigate, because I think there's also something underneath that where, not to dissect things too much, but even in that, uh, notice that there's like a validation of your worth in that, of your,
Yeah, you're right.
right? Like they can trust me, which means, or they feel like they can trust me, which means they value my opinion. They believe that I am a good enough, trustworthy enough, responsible enough, non-loser of a type who actually they trust, take my advice. They believe
So,
that I'm high enough, in status to be
so
able
what's
to.
what's the question in this case?
Yeah,
And
well, it's to notice that even that, and again, I'm not to say like you shouldn't feel love from that sort of thing, but just to notice that even that is stemming from that same starting point.
well, what I'm wondering is, are we talking? Is the question here? Because you asked me and I answered it, but I can't
Yeah.
remember what the question was. Was the question, um, how do we understand love from other people? Something like that. I
Yeah.
can't remember how you
Yeah.
phrased it.
Well, how do you recognize or feel love from other people, when it's being expressed by other people?
Okay.
For one, because it's a clue on what it what you what you perhaps needed back then, and even more so what you need now to feel, um loved, uh perhaps compensated is a word that comes up for some reason,
Hmm.
like, that feeling of like connection happens through some of these means, and it's interesting to see what they are, but it's also interesting to see how you can do that for yourself as well.
Yeah, that's the big one, because one thing I've started to kind of figure out in the last while, I don't know how long it's been, is that trying to get that from other people, no matter how much they might really care and how well intentioned they are, is really unreliable, to the point that
Completely.
for a while now, maybe a year, maybe more, I've been retraining myself to quit looking for, demand, or expect
Yep.
for either of the two members of this house to be able to really give me their attention. They're not wired that way.
Yep.
Their brains operate differently, and so it has nothing to do with me. But I can start talking, and then they're off somewhere else.
Yeah.
And it used to hurt my feelings. That happened enough times where I realized, okay, this doesn't work. And so I've gradually retrained myself to not require, need, or expect that. So it's got
And
to come from somewhere.
Absolutely. And it's relevant for you to notice that, okay, two things came out of that. One is that you can give yourself love, not just by saying, I love myself, I love myself, I love myself, which is fine, but by noticing your own, paying attention to yourself, paying attention to the needs that are there, that same sort of attention that you want from other people directed at you, to see if you are, to do those things that make you feel like you are really paying attention to your own needs, to what's going
Hmm.
on. And then also that self-trust, that, making sure that you're really expressing and recognizing that you have an internal sense of trust for your own experiences, your own, um eh, like if you have that inherent sense of unworthiness or loser, you know you have a fundamental starting point in your own trustworthiness.
Hang on a
Sorry,
sec.
untrustworthiness. Actually, I'm going to go pee. I'll be right back.
Okay, that works. What you're describing there, when it comes to doing those things for ourselves, what does that look like?
Well, it depends on you. Oh, the other thing I wanted to say to you just before I
Oh,
forget
okay.
is, without going into the whole like five love languages kind of thing, it's also
Mhm.
relevant to notice that not everybody expresses love the same way. And so
Makes
being
sense.
being open to recognizing how it is being expressed from other people, even if it's not in those ways that we have, for whatever reason, arbitrarily defined as the way that I experience and express love. So it's just being open to recognizing that other
Hmm.
people have different starting points too, different experiences. And so it might not be the same for everybody. So
Yeah.
if you feel like, you know, you need them to show you trust and attention for you to feel that love from them, also notice the other ways in which they might be expressing it that is relevant to them, that just might not be the way that you're expecting it.
Right.
But so that's just something I wanted to put out for you to, also just kind of be aware of as you're going through all this. But then, to answer your question, basically it's like the reparenting thing where you like ask the child what they need and then give it to them. It's
Mhm.
that sort of thing, but right now, right, for current 2024 Darrell, it's to be like, if you feel like showing attention and trust is equanimous, or is equated with love, then recognizing like all the ways that you could possibly need to do that for yourself, which you perhaps might not be doing enough to be able to feel that. And what I was getting at before was that if you have those, that inherent starting point of your own loser nature or unworthiness or untrustworthiness, you are reinforcing to yourself all the time that you're not worthy of that self-love, right? Do you really trust yourself fundamentally?
Hmm. In many ways, yes, there are some places where I let myself down, but there are a lot of places where, yes, I do know I can count on myself for certain things.
Good. So being aware of those, being aware of um what it feels like you need for reinforcement from yourself, because like you said, we can't rely upon anything from other people like that. It's great when we get it, it's gravy on top, but fundamentally we can't survive on that alone, because you don't know.
Right.
Anytime uh we're in need of something from somebody else in any sort of supply, we're always in some sort of a danger place. That's why the
Right.
Buddha was very adamant about, being a light unto yourself. Basically, we're trying to be as self-sufficient in all of these things as possible, because if you need anything, whether it's an attachment to a drug, a food, a person, or anything else, we're always left in a place of instability where if they go and we
Right.
can't get it, we are dropped into the hell realms. So So here we are. So it's really being recognizing in you, what do you need to feel loved by you in that way?
What do you mean by that? For that little fragment there, in that way?
In the way that you've described,
Okay.
like feeling like, if you do like a meta meditation and like feel that sense of love for other people or who you love or animals or whatever else, and then direct it to you and feel that warmth inside, that's one way of feeling that love. But that
Okay.
might not be for you the one that's most meaningful. For you, it might be really feeling that at your core, you are trustworthy, that I have my own back no matter what happens, that I can handle any situation no matter what happens.
Hmm.
And that might be more substantial.
Huh? That last
That
part
might
again?
that might be more substantial for you than just feeling that kind of warm glow and directing it towards yourself.
Yeah, but that's a tricky one. It's funny because the conversation between you and I that I was listening to earlier today, that very thing came up in there. And when
Yeah.
I was listening to it, I thought the only problem there is that, um, and I wish I could remember how you just put it, but oh, that I have my back and that I can handle any situation.
Yeah.
Well, that would be nice, but I am a human being. There are limitations, and so I know that there are things that are going to sooner or later going to run into something that's beyond my capacity. And so when I heard you say that earlier today, when I heard you say it now, that same thought came up of that. I like that idea. It sounds good. I'm willing to try to put that into practice and work with that. But how do I respond to that sense that, mm, if I tell myself I can handle any situation that comes up, there's another part of the mind that's going, yeah, but
Okay. Two things. First of all, that is just the mind. You are not
okay,
currently in one of those situations. So
right.
in this moment, there's no reason to doubt the fact or deny the fact that you could. There's a hypothetical that maybe you'll run into a situation one day in which you can't, but that is not a proven fact. That is the mind throwing up an obstacle, still
Hmm.
saying that, yeah, I'm not sure I'm totally worthy of that kind of trust. Still some hesitation.
Oh, okay. I hadn't thought of it that way.
So
All
there's a bit of resistance for you. And then the other part of it is, what do you actually consider the capacity to handle anything? Are we talking like literally a building catches on fire and you're running in and putting out the building, putting out the fire by yourself? Or are we talking about having having Tuesday get into something, going off with that guy when she's 18, and you not losing your shit about it, and you being able to figure out some way of dealing with it from a standpoint of composure and decorum?
well, I actually think that second one is really possible just based on the things that have changed over the last 12 months or so. But no, it's more like, I didn't really get specific when I thought about it, but just sitting here now, I'm thinking, okay, God forbid I had to deal with, say, the IRS or the police or something.
Hmm.
Those are notorious for having the power of the state on your neck in a way that you can't do anything about.
So in that moment, though, the question isn't, you know, can you get the IRS off your back, or can you get out of a uh, false accusation by the cops or something? The
Mhm.
question is how you deal with that situation.
How do you mean?
Well, are you going to be completely overtaken by fear and stress and, you know,
Uh,
torn apart by it, or
So it's not a matter of being able to handle any situation in the sense of having the capacity, physical strength, etc., brain power to handle anything that the universe might uh,
Hmm.
might generate, but it's that a capacity to deal with whatever comes our way.
Precisely. I'm not
Okay.
saying
All
you
right.
have to have a law degree and be able to, like, be your own lawyer and talk yourself out of something.
Right. Okay.
That's unrealistic. But it's like that. There's that old Zen story, is it so?
Right.
That so, right? Like
Yeah.
whatever happens, is that so? All right. I guess that's my kid. I'll take the kid on and I'll raise the kid until they come back and say, oh, I'm sorry, I lied. And then, oh, okay, is that so? It's really having that capacity to roll with whatever life throws at you without
I see.
being thrown off course.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm glad you put it that way because I can relate that to people I've known who did have that capacity.
Yeah.
And I'm talking about two people who, one of them just he wound up dealing with a really horrible situation, and he handled it with total grace. Another person it was their state of health and their life situation, and it was something they had to deal every day for the rest of their life. And
Yeah.
again, he dealt with his circumstances with total grace. I mean, it bordered on miraculous watching the way he dealt with the hand that was dealt him.
Yeah.
So when you say it that way, okay, that changes
Yeah.
everything.
There you go. So that's what I'm talking about. And
All
it's
right.
that trustworthy in yourself, that trust, that feeling of trust in yourself, that I've got this. No matter
Okay.
what life throws at me, I can handle it.
Okay. All right. Well, yeah, that when you put it when you explain it that way, that changes everything.
Good.
So,
Yeah.
okay.
There we go.
I'm
Yeah,
glad I
no,
asked.
yeah, of course. Yeah. I mean, I'm not saying that you should like be able to perform open heart surgery on yourself. Like there are limitations to, to what we're talking about here.
Okay. Well, leave it to me to go over to the extreme with it like that. So,
Having some chest pains. Get me a can opener and a butter knife. I got this.
Dr. MacGyver.
Completely. A roll of duct tape and I'm good.
Oh man. Okay. Hmm. All right. Well, um, it's funny how that came up first in the talk I was listening to, and then you said
Uh,
very nearly the exact same thing just sitting here now.
Tend to
Um,
do
well, I mean, I'm glad it came up because if it hadn't, I would be walking around with that misunderstanding about what you meant by
that.
that,
Yeah.
and that opens a door that previously had been, just as closed as it could be. Um,
Amazing.
so, and now you've asked those questions, and I'm curious to dig into those and see what I find because I had never, I had never really considered those things in that way.
Yeah.
I mean, I've thought about it in a general way since that I, concluded years ago that no one really knows what love is.
Yeah.
Um, um, and that, most people have um, misinformed ideas about it. But that's as far as I went. Never
Yeah.
thought about it in terms of what does it actually mean to me? How do I how do I understand it? What does it look like?
Yeah. How does it feel? How do you recognize that this person is expressing love for me and this person isn't? Sure, one might say, I love you, but that doesn't even
Right?
necessarily mean anything. Right.
Exactly.
So how is it shown to you in a way that you recognize it? And then how does that feel for you when you do?
Hmm.
What is the difference like in your internal state when somebody does something that makes you feel love versus when they just do something else that's just like, oh, well, thank you for that.
Hmm. Well, it's curious because I've kind of this is something I've wondered about because of the fact that Susanna feels love very deeply,
Mhm.
very freely, and very easily.
Mm,
I mean, to an extent that I can't wrap my head around it.
yeah.
And especially when I think about all the things that were done to her by her grandfather and her uncle, and then her family as well, her sisters and her mom.
Yeah.
Like how does she have that capacity after all of that? It's really mind boggling.
Mm,
But I, I I've never experienced love as some sort of big, warm, fuzzy. There's infatuation, but
mhm.
infatuation is something else. That's
Yep. Totally.
something else entirely. Um, but it just doesn't seem to show up as some sort of, like I said, warm fuzzy feeling. It's something that's quieter. It's calmer. It seems to be a very relaxed, quiet sort of thing. Like in times when I have felt that, um, usually the state that follows is experienced as relaxed, at ease, calm, quiet, and kind of okay. I can just drop everything for a minute,
Nice.
which runs contrary to pretty much all of the descriptions we hear about it.
Mhm. Completely. And it's so funny because I can actually resonate with that. That like
Hmm.
Pernilla is amazing in that she is like she really feels that deep, huge, incredible sense of love, and it is wonderful. And I have always been somebody that has felt like you. It's a much more reserved kind of. I would say, there's like something closer to delight, maybe. Like there's like this like
Yeah,
when you look at her and it's like this like there's like this there's a warmth, there's a delight, there's a feeling like that. There's the for me it's like I tend to experience and express love by doing for the other person. So
you and I share
so
that in common.
yeah, right. So like if she's, making me a cup of coffee, I feel the love in that it's like they're right. And so I tend to express by doing a lot of things like that. It's always been the way that it's just my way of expressing it. And so
Right.
but I'm with you in that the feeling isn't the like super overwhelming, expansive thing. I don't really feel any emotions that extreme, like that's just kind of
Yeah.
pick up with this body, I think.
Yeah.
Um,
Exactly.
but I know it's there, and how it is lovely.
Hmm.
So there's no shine against it. It's not that it has to be one way or another, but it's
Right.
never been that kind of thing. It's a much more, again, the same like everything. It's just it's a much more um easy, calm, reserved, like kind of like you were saying, it's this kind of
Yeah.
at ease kind of a way of experiencing it. So yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
There's more of an openness and a receptivity to it.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
uh, which I guess kind of makes sense because if somebody expresses that towards you, you're um, in some way or another you're going to have your guard down to some
Yeah.
degree. So I guess that kind of follows.
Yeah, yeah, and again, we're all different, though I think we share some similarities, but
Mhm.
we're all different in how we how we define and experience and feel and express this thing that we call love. And it
Right.
is different for, I like you, I've also always been really interested in that we only have like one word for love, even though
Yeah.
very clearly there's something different between you and your wife versus you and your parents versus you and your kids versus you
Right.
and your friends versus you and all of humanity versus, there are all these different ways that we talk about love, and yet clearly there are some different hallmarks of each.
Absolutely.
So
Yeah.
I've always found a bit of a limitation in the English only having one word for this multiplicity of experiences.
Yeah. Yeah. We definitely do it a disservice.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's far more complicated and varied than we give it credit for.
Oh
But
yeah.
um, but this is why we still have to each individually find how we define each of these things.
Hmm.
You know?
That's kind of a funny thing because not only had I never really specified these things, really answered the questions that you've asked, but uh, um, see, it wasn't just the questions that you asked, it was also I lost that train of thought. There was something else there. Oh well.
The consideration of all of the different ways in which love can be, was it about that?
No, it was about the fact that I wouldn't have expected this to be a conversation that we'd have.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
there's nothing wrong with it. It's perfectly fine, and
Yeah.
it's as legitimate and valid as anything else. It's just it's funny. I would um, all the things we've covered over the months. Um, I realized sitting here, there was a very mild sense of surprise. Like this is an interesting place to have gone.
And yet I find it kind of makes sense because we talked
Sure.
so much about self-love and all of that, but we don't really define like I think it's kind of
Yeah.
weird that we haven't talked about this more in how we actually define self-love other than just feeling a warm, fuzzy feeling.
You're right. You're right. When you put it that way, you're right. It seems like it should have come up sooner, but better late than never.
Yeah.
Um, um, so uh, it kind of boggles my mind a little bit that you ask those questions, and I oh okay, it's dogs playing. I couldn't come up with an answer. Um, whereas if you'd asked Susanna that, she would have been able to rattle off a lot of things really quickly.
Yeah. Yeah.
But which is funny because when it comes to the way that she's been affected by her past, she's carrying some of the same kinds of she's got her own starting points, I guess
Mhm.
is how to say it.
Yep.
And her sense of self-value um, has really been affected by it. But yet at the same time, like I said, if you'd asked her about this, she would have been able to answer all of those questions quite readily.
Mhm.
So,
This is why it's really relevant to get into our own experience. And it's actually another type of self-love to even get curious about what it is that we actually need.
yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Huh, yeah. Well, I'm curious to see what the answers to these will be. My attention keeps going back to that because it's just such an unexpected surprise,
Hmm.
and not just that it came up, but also that again that I couldn't give you ready answers to that.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, so it's kind of nagging at me to find out what the answers to those questions are.
Yeah, it's going to be a really interesting exploration.
There was something else real quick,
Mhm.
just in kind of in the way of a check-in. It's been a very slow process with the things we've talked about regarding um, um, I can't think of the terms for them. One's associated with Fetter 4, the other's with 5. Um,
Craving and aversion,
yeah, that's it.
desire and anxiety.
And yeah, and the business of um, when there's a reaction, staying with that primary sensation.
Yeah.
Um, it's been a couple of weeks or more since we talked about that. I think it's been maybe 6 weeks since we talked about that. And
Wow.
it's just now getting to the point where it happens. And occasionally, I'll remember to stop and stay with that primary sensation.
Nice.
Most of the time, I catch it right after the moment has passed.
Yep.
Before, I couldn't even remember at all. Before, it was like
Right. So
I'd walk away from it and go, "Oh man, I missed it."
major progress.
Yeah, that's how I thought of it.
It
Like, okay,
absolutely
getting
is.
closer to the mark.
Yep. Exactly. You're retraining and it can take a while. But that's amazing that you're going from not noticing to noticing it after to sometimes noticing it while it's happening. Eventually it will be like just the very precursor of it and you'll notice like, ooh, there it's starting. But then it doesn't even have a chance to like
Oh,
fully
cool.
manifest because it's just like, ooh, yeah, okay, well, I recognize that from, from the very beginning. That's what I used to do with that's how I got past one of the ways that I got past uh panic attacks so many years ago was that
Really?
same sort of thing of noticing it like okay, after the panic attack happens, you recognize that it happened. Then at some point you're noticing during the panic attack that it happens that like okay, this is happening and this is what it feels like, not just like,
Hmm.
oh shit, it's here I'm having whatever, but it's like, what does it really feel like? And then it's like earlier and earlier into the panic attack, you start to feel what it feels like to where you start to get like, I would start to get the very first like, flutter of the heart or the feeling of like something would happen and that would normally have just immediately escalated. And then it's just like, nope. It's like, I see you. No, we're not going down that path again. Like this is, and it's really checking in with the actual situation, what's really here right now. How am I actually feeling? Noticing that this racing heart does not mean I'm having a heart attack. The fact that, it does not mean that the person I'm with is going to die or whatever the panic thing would have been about. It's like, no, this is just a physiological response. Just breathe, come back to what is really here, and then gone. And so that's how I ended up panic attack free. But it really was like a gradual process of getting earlier and earlier into seeing it to retrain.
That's really cool.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm very thankful for that.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah.
And it shows you what learning to pay attention in the moment can do for a person.
Changes everything.
Yeah, obviously.
Absolutely changes everything.
I mean, because I've known people who have had to deal with panic, and just seeing it from the outside, wow. I'm glad that's never been an issue for me.
Yeah. Yeah. It sucks. It
I,
really sucks.
yeah, I can only imagine. I actually don't even think I can imagine. I can only guess.
Yeah, it's basically like being in an elevator that is the walls are closing in on you,
Mhm.
faster and faster and feeling just that like absolute trapped, going to die, like, you know, can't breathe, heart racing, gonna have a heart attack or suffocate or something. And, all of the because I was a very imagination minded person, it's like, it just the mind just takes off and it just spirals
Right,
to every worst case scenario and what this means, which just reinforces the panic. It just
right.
becomes this increasing spiral of worse and worse and worse and worse and worse. So yeah, no good comes of that.
Right. Well, in the moment, no. I mean, you're one of a number of people I've either talked to or heard say that because of their panic and or anxiety, that they've had to do something about it, and it has led them to someplace more or less like this.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And
Uh,
it was interesting because it was like what helped me get through it was actually that I was already acquainted with Buddhism and no self and that stuff. Only,
mhm.
at least conceptually, I hadn't really had, but conceptually, I knew about it. And that alone was very useful. But having the meditation practice, the mindfulness practice was what had helped me to be present and to recognize it earlier and earlier. Uh,
Right.
I'm not sure what would have happened if I had never had any of that stuff, but for sure it was all of that suffering that had led me to Buddhism and to meditation and all of that. And so it's really paid off. It absolutely was the significant factor in there. or how to
Yeah.
get rid of that stuff.
Yeah. Well, and that's kind of the case with me, except that panic didn't play a role in it. I mean, yeah, there was one time when I had a really, and I've talked about this. So this came up when you asked me to kind of outline how I even came to this in that very first one-on-one. But there wasn't any panic involved. But yeah, I did have a situation that scared the daylights out of me,
Mhm.
and it led me to a moment of okay, enough's enough.
Yeah.
As I put it at the time to myself, I didn't get sober to live like this.
Love
um,
it. Yeah.
um, I guess that was it. I thought there was something else, but if there is, I can send you an email because it seems like there was something else around that whole thing with the learning to stay with that primary sensation. But I can't imagine there's anything so important that I needed to figure it out right here and now. So, and I know Susanna's going to be calling sometime soon.
Yeah.
And I would like to talk to her and find out what the heck it's been like.
Yeah, I'm super curious to hear actually.
Did you
So
see my email about the fact that people have been talking to her about our videos?
yeah, thank you very much for that. That's amazing to hear.
That surprised me. I didn't expect that. When
It
she
doesn't
sent me that text, like, what?
it doesn't surprise me. I have heard so many amazing so much amazing feedback about this series and how grateful people are for you for doing this and being open and honest and how much they relate to it. I mean, I was literally just talking to somebody today that was saying that every time one of our videos come out, they immediately go on and watch it. And the stuff that you talk about relates so much. Like even the thing, ironically, they brought up the dropping of the glass, that the mug, and that
Really?
and when you said like after that, they like then you looked at your dog and thought you could throw the dog out the window. And
Uh,
this person had remembered like they used to walk across a bridge and have that urge to throw their wallet off the bridge. There was like some same kind of connection there. And so there is such a similarity between people and their experiences that it is so helpful to have something like this because you are literally giving like hundreds of people one-to-one sessions basically by in it's like vicarious one-to-ones because their experiences are so similar to what you're expressing.
well, I'm glad that that's the case. I mean, because by by my very nature, I'm not a public person at all.
Mm.
You know, um, I've related myself to Neil Peart, the drummer from Rush, in that he was never comfortable with public attention. He
I
was
didn't
never
know that.
comfortable with he was totally at odds with being a public figure of any kind. Look at the lyrics to the song Limelight, it's all in there.
Okay.
He was he was totally at odds with it to the point in the last not quite a decade, but the last 8 years or so of their career. I mean, he didn't go to meet and greets. He
Wow.
completely stayed away. He let the other two guys handle everything that was
Interesting.
relating to the public. And
Wow.
I feel that same kind of inclination. Tend to be private, don't like attention,
Yep.
uh, that kind of thing. So when you asked me, there was a part of me inside going, oh no, 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 no. And then when he said it'll help people, it's like, oh, he just said exactly the right thing. Dang
That's awesome.
it. Okay, well, now I can't say no.
That's amazing.
So it really does mean a lot when people say that in the comments or they say it to you or like they've said it to Suzanne and like, okay, you know what? That's really thank you for saying it because it really does make it all worthwhile because there are times where I will think about it. Either I'll watch one of the videos or I'll know it's gone live, something
Yeah.
around it. And I'll
Yeah.
think, oh God, there's another one that's out in the public domain.
And I've never once heard any negative comment about it at all. Like
That's
it has
freaking great.
been nothing but positive.
Well, that really, I'm glad to hear that. But it really, what the most important thing is the fact that even if some people thought, man, that is the most ridiculous crap I've ever heard in my life, even if just 1% of people were going, God, that made all the difference in the world to me,
Yeah.
that would be worth it. That
Yeah.
would make it all worthwhile.
Yeah.
So,
I love that. So thank you again for doing that on
Yeah.
behalf of everybody else who's actually getting something out of this too. Thank you for that.
Well, thank you for asking me. Yeah, really.
My pleasure. Yeah, it's
Um,
been wonderful so far.
Yeah, it has. It really has. I mean, it's kind of it's become these conversations, and we're talking through email. The whole thing, the whole connection has, um, and not to minimize perfectly okay and Finder's
Mhm.
course, that has been, I can't say enough good things about all of that. And
Yeah,
I'm really tremendously grateful that Patty and John Conway put together perfectly okay, and all the
yeah,
people like David Kennedy and these other people who help to keep it going are doing it.
yeah,
um, but at the same time, I and I still do some meetings, but this has become the whole center of the process as it is for me now. um,
yeah.
so um, you know I don't know what else to say. I mean, it's just, um, I guess that's an expression of the fact that it is, of its importance, in that it is central to my life at this point in time.
Yeah.
So
It's my pleasure and it's an honor, and I thank you for putting everything into it as much as you have, because it's that real focus and ability to, like, actually ironically going back to what we were talking about, it's the trust in what we're doing that you're expressing, which is making it so that you like are fully diving into things and really getting the most out of them. So it all comes down to that commitment to actually putting it into action and really utilizing everything that we talk about, and not just keeping it at like a conceptual basic
yeah.
level. Like, you're really putting it into practice, and that's where the benefits are.
Well, and that all comes down to the fact that have lost my tolerance for suffering.
It's a great place to be.
Yeah, it is. What I think in AA they call it the gift of desperation.
Oh, that's great. I like that.
All right. Well, I'm going to head on and see if she has called yet.
Yep,
And
perfect. Tell her I said hello, and
I
I hope
will.
she's enjoying it. And thank you very much.
Yeah.
I'll
Well,
talk to you soon.
likewise. Okay. Yeah. So see you in a couple weeks at 11 Central Time.
Sounds good. Thank you for that. All
Yeah.
right.
Sure.
See you
All right,
soon.
talk to you later.
Thank you. Bye.